Okay, everyone, and we are at our roundtable. Sitting with me today, I have our usual commentator-in-chief, Miguel Castro Neto. I think I can call you this by now, Miguel, with the amount of times you've been here with us. Miguel is Associate Dean at NOVA IMS and also coordinator at NOVA CIDADE Urban Analytics Lab, which is one of our challenge and data providers. And today we also have Stefaan Verhulst sitting at the table with us. He is co-founder and chief R&D officer of the Governance Laboratory at New York University. We were supposed to have Nuno Santos from PSE with us, but due to family constraints, he couldn't attend, and he apologized for that. So, super good to have you both with us. How do you feel, Miguel and Stefaan?
Great.
Ready to rumble?
Thanks for having me. Delighted to be part of the World Data League, which is very exciting, and great to see Miguel again as well, and pretty impressed with the challenges that you've put forth here.
That's
awesome.
It's a great pleasure to be here once again in one of these meetings on World Data League, but especially today because I have the opportunity to see you again, Stefaan. The last time we were together was in Lisbon, in NOVA Information Management School, and I was trying to remember. I think it was, I don't know, 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, something like that. And I tease you already with the first topic to approach. I think it's not directly targeted at the challenge that we face here today in this specific 4th stage, but related to all the World Data League, because I was quite impressed with the work that you were doing at the time with data collaboratives, with this huge challenge that we have today, which is the fact that the data that we look for in order to try to build better cities, it's no longer most of the times in the hand of the public sector, but in the private sector. And we have somehow to find a common ground where we can share data, although at the same time not impose constraints to the business models that must be present. So, and I wonder from that moment, what have you been done lately and doing?
Well, thanks for that question, and thanks for the reminder of what was indeed a great event. I think it was about 4 years ago in Lisbon, and indeed one of the areas that we have developed is the issue or the concept and the practice of data collaboration. Just as a backup, GovLab, we are an action research center, and so our focus is on how do we improve the way we make decisions in the public interest. And towards that end, we have focused on what we believe are 2 important assets that are uniquely that have a unique potential to change the way we go about making decisions. On the one hand, people, and so we do a lot of work around collective intelligence. How do we tap into the wisdom that resides within cities, for instance, but also how do we go about engaging with people in new ways that can actually co-create some of the solutions. And then the other asset, obviously, I guess, which is why we're here today, is of course data. And here we've done a lot of work on how do we leverage, but more importantly, also access data that could improve people's lives by changing the way we go about solving problems, making decisions, providing public services. And indeed, we've done a lot of work on open government data, and we are still doing a lot of work on open government data. It's not a problem that has been solved, as you know, completely, because I think we still need a lot more action in that space. But then the realization while we were working on some hard problems is indeed the realization is that most of the time, the data that could enable better decision-making quite often resides within the private sector. And so as a society, we really have to start thinking about how do we access data and subsequently reuse data that was collected for one purpose for another purpose. And I think that's anyway, one of the big challenges in the data age is how do we prevent misuse? But the second biggest challenge from my point of view is how do we facilitate reuse? And that's what we have been focusing on. And specifically also in the context of today's topic, we've done a lot of work with cities on how do we set up city data collaboratives in order to, for instance, answer questions that are posed, the questions that are posed today. And within that context, we've also done a lot of work on the concept, Miguel, of what we call circular city data. Data collected within the city, how do we can start using it to make decisions for the city? And I think a lot of the data sets that were mentioned could be part of that circular city data kind of concept, where you have data collected in the city for one purpose. You can actually start using it to make better decisions as it relates to improving quality of life, for instance, as it relates to air quality.
Miguel, I see you moving, but yeah, the word of 2020, like Stefan was saying, off.
Muted. No, it's congratulations, because the term you coined of the circular city data, that's quite interesting. I mean, it's all a new approach to it. But we have also that problem, of course. It's a global problem. But what we have also been facing, which is in fact an opportunity for initiatives like this of the World Data League, is the city hall. They are facing now a new problem, which is not only the difficulties regarding data access, but also how to take advantage of the data. So it's we are now facing a skills problem also, because it's a new world and digital transformation. Although we have the feeling that everything is changing really fast, it's not so true when it comes to organizations. And we see today that this kind of initiatives, these hackathons, can really create value, because what is done here can, when it is shared, can be used and reused in many realities. So it's not just a question of data reuse, but also this kind of solutions that are built also in a co-creation model that can give an important contribution to this new city that we aim to promote.
To both of you, I couldn't agree more with everything that you just said. I want to, though, because I feel that this is such an interesting topic that we could be having another roundtable just about this, and hopefully we can. I want to bring us a little bit more to the topic of environment. So I would just like to go around the table with both of you before we actually jump to the questions from the audience about why, how can environment be solved? How can environmental problems in a data-driven city be solved with data? Why is this even an important problem to solve, in your opinion?
Who do you want to go first?
We do rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah, I've always been bad in that in that case.
You know, Stefan, we cannot do rock, paper, scissors, because if I win, then I have nothing good to say. No, I'll let you go first, Stefan. As our
sure. And eager to hear also Miguel, and especially also the practice in Lisbon. But so obviously the topic of today is I think a key element within a city context, but also more broadly. And we've done quite some work on the issue of air quality and its implications on environmental health, on human health, and on animal health as well, because I think we do need to embrace a new kind of what we call circular health kind of concept within that area. And again, I'm not gonna elaborate on circular health, because that in itself, by the way, could be an interesting topic to really think about the interdependencies. And COVID-19, surprise, surprise, is actually one clear example of our failure to actually adopt a more circular health kind of approach. And again, this is my second time already where I use the term circular, which, as you can see, becomes perhaps a mantra also within a city kind of context. But I think clearly cities and environment, and especially air quality, have a complex relationship. On the one hand, cities are a major contributor to actually greenhouse gases and subsequently environmental changes as well, and also, of course, air pollution. If you think about cities, if you anyway would do a mapping, I think they occupy about 2% of the world's land mass, and they contribute about 70%, if not more, of the greenhouse gases. And so cities are a major, to a large extent, polluter and contribute to a variety of problems. And then within cities, of course, one of the main concerns and one of the main areas that contributes is, of course, mobility and the way we go about moving around within a city. I think, and again, first of all, as many that are diving into this problem will realize, is that it's not a straightforward problem, because there are different types of pollutants, right? And there are different types of concerns with regard to air quality depending on the pollutants. But when it comes to, for instance, carbon monoxide, then you could see that about 70% of that, which contributes quite a lot to smog and that kind of challenges that we have within cities, then 70% is a result of motorized vehicles, right? So it's not only cars, but also trucks and other motorized vehicles as well. And then if we look into how that contributes, then we can see that ultimately that is about 1/3 of all the air pollutants that are existing within a city. So, so a major problem there. And of course, the impacts are massive, especially at the public health level. And I think I just checked actually before this call, what is the amount of deaths that are contributed to air quality worldwide that are premature. And it's about 7 million per year. People die as a result of bad air quality. If you compare that with COVID, that's double than what COVID has contributed. And so in terms of scale, right, COVID is a major health crisis, but double amount of deaths are the result of air quality. So you can actually see that air quality actually is a massive, massive challenge. And of course, and that's perhaps also something of interest for this challenge, is that the challenge is not equally distributed. Quite often it's people that are living in poorer neighborhoods that are suffering more of actually the air pollutants, because quite often they live closer to, for instance, highways, which, by the way, is really where quite often the air pollutants are concentrated, or are active close to factories, for instance, as well, which of course is still also a contributor as well. And then there is even a gendered aspect to the burden of air quality. Quite often women are suffering more, not only because of the air quality outside, but also inside. How they cook and what they cook with has a major actually contribution to health challenges as a result of air quality in households. And so it's not only the air quality outside in the city, it's also air quality inside in the home that quite often is problematic. And then, of course, again, how one heats one's home also contributes to a variety of air quality aspects. So major public health challenge, and cities are, and there's my dog that goes berserk, and major challenge with of course, cities that are a major contributor to the problem. So I'm going to stop here because there are many more challenges associated with it. But I think I would love to hear from Miguel, perhaps also before we go into a variety of other implications if we don't deal with the air quality challenges within cities, especially for the quality of life of people.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And since you referred the comparison with the deaths by COVID, but I think also that COVID suddenly created the global awareness on what was the real state of the cities. Because when we saw the cities empty of cars and of airplanes flying over, we suddenly understood what we were doing, because there was silence, there was a better air quality, and all of this also showed us an evidence that we are not doing the what we can do. And I think we are going to see changes in the short term regarding this. But I think there is also another challenge, which is at a global scale, there is also a kind of a bigger problem, because due to the energy sources of certain economies, this problem is much greater in certain regions than in others. So although we know that still in Europe or North America we have air pollution problems in cities, we are in fact much better than other cities and other realities. And this we usually don't take into consideration the consequences in public health and in animal health. And I don't know if Stefan was referring to what animals, but also to the biodiversity of the cities. So it's quite for me, it's quite impressive, because I know that COVID impacted us a lot, but if we have a long-term view, it has not been so long, the impact of COVID. But in this short term, we saw wildlife come back to the cities. So, and this is only because the air pollution and the pressure of the mobility, the transportation suddenly was not there. So, and I would like also to make a connection with the green infrastructures that will not only impact the air quality, but also what is called the heat islands in cities. And so everything is connected. And this opportunity to have challenges addressing this issue give us this opportunity to look at the different aspects and to see how we can enrich the problem with data from other sources, and in fact measure not only how can I reduce traffic, but also how can this impact health, and also how should we improve the green infrastructures of the city, how that can increase the wildlife in the city. So it's and it's amazing. And I like very much one example from New York, which is the High Line. I think it's High Line, how it's called, because they took advantage of a old train line, and nowadays is I don't know how to call it. So, but it's a space of
public park. Yeah,
it's a public park. It's a green infrastructure, and it's across the urban area in the very dense populated space. And so it's up to us to decide what we are going to do.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, Miguel, and exactly the High Line is like the success story of repurposing unused lots within a city, greening it, and as a result, by the way, the High Line is now the most visited tourist attraction in New York, and so and it has generated a whole new neighborhood. I can assure you that the prices for for apartments and housing close to the High Line have skyrocketed, and so it has regenerated. Of course, anyway, there's a whole concern with gentrification and so on as a result, perhaps as well. But I think just greening a part of the city also has a massive impact on the value of the of property, and so it's not just improving quality of life; it's also improving actually how people value the neighborhood. And there are other examples of that, like in New York. Also, there are anyway many years ago, actually, they started already looking at what are some lots that are unused, and they've made it into community gardens. And so there's a whole range of options to actually what quite often is called tactical urbanism, where you actually look into what is not used and how can we actually use it to green a city. I think there's a whole range of those activities happening.
That's great that you mentioned that, Stefan, because I was actually gonna pick up on the topic of green spaces, not only because it's one of the challenges that we're trying to tackle, but also to use it as a solution for the environmental, or as part of the solution for the environmental impact that we have, and kind of a challenging question with such tight spaces in cities. What other smart solutions to green areas can you give us besides the High Line, for example? Have you heard of other cases?
Yeah, there's a whole range of options that, if you think about it, where and how can you green a city, right? And so you just have to go out and see that anyway, a lot of the spaces are occupied by cars. And so if you can start thinking about how can we revisit parking and use some of that for actually greening a city, or also making it more people-centric, right? So opening up or closing cities for cars and actually engaging. And that's another element, and I agree with Miguel, is that COVID-19, if it's one silver lining is that, oh gosh, one silver lining is that it has been a massive natural experiment to really think about how can we do things differently. And so here in New York City, many streets are now closed in weekends anyway, initially it was to give more social distancing, but that has now become a part of life, right? And is now, I think the city council has now approved it to make it indefinitely. And so, so anyway, that's just one element in addition to greening, which is making streets more people-centric. But anyway, if you were just fly over a city, just look at all the roofs that you have there that could be made green as well, right? And so green roofing is one of the elements that has been used in a variety of cities. I think Barcelona has actually a whole guide on how to roof green, or how to develop green roofs. And also you can think about urban forests. And I think it's the city of Melbourne, if you're interested, has a guidebook on how to create urban forests in cities. Now, one caveat, which I think is very interesting, is that you do have to not only think in terms of animal diversity or biodiversity, as Miguel said, you also, when you do that, you also have to think about diversity of the plants and the trees you are planting. Because what has happened in New York, which is just as an example on doing this strategically, is what they call botanical sexism, and the impact on city life. And basically what it means is that the city had a preference for male trees. And so they have planted male trees everywhere. And the result of that is that allergies are through the roof. My wife and my son, they can hardly go out when it's spring or fall, for that matter, because of the pollen that those male trees are generating, that has generated an allergic reaction to most people living in those neighborhoods. And so you have to think about this strategically, right? So I think that's just an example that greening is great, but don't create new problems for the quality of life by, for instance, not being strategic around how you actually generate a healthy green environment, not just by having, for instance, male plants that then generate their own problems because they are actually a new source of pollution, which is a natural source that generates allergic reactions. And I think those are elements that one needs to think about. And just for instance, from a data point of view, looking at have we data about the types of green flora and fauna, and what does that, how does that contribute to a healthy ecosystem? Those are elements that I think we need to start looking into as well.
And picking up on this, we should always try to look at the big picture. One of my concerns today is that we speak a lot about the need to change the the energy source for the cars in order to solve the problem of the pollution. But if we only move from traditional to electrical vehicles, we still have the same pressure on cities due to cars. So of course, we will improve the air quality, but that will not allow us to give the public space back to the citizens. And so I'm a little bit concerned because at least in Portugal, now we are funding people that buys an electrical car. And in my opinion, we should not fund any, it should exist no incentive for private owned cars. And so sometimes what seems a good idea at first, if we think a little bit more about it, in the end of the day, it's not good for society.
Yeah, and not to mention, Miguel, talking about the electric cars, not to mention the problems that now we're finding out that are kind of arriving about the lithium batteries. How do you renew these lithium batteries? The pollution that they produce. It's a tricky problem. But like Stefan was saying, sometimes it feels that we propose solutions without really thinking about the consequences of those solutions. But maybe it's because it's 4-year terms, usually politically, right?
Exactly. And I totally agree with Miguel, is that the task should not be how do we change the car diversity in a city. We should just try to think about how do we have less of them. And I think that's where that one concept, which I like a lot, which also might be of interest to the those working on the challenge, is the concept of the 15-minute city. And I think that's kind of an interesting concept to think about also as it relates to air pollution and air quality, which is how do I find the essentials within a range of 15 minutes so that I don't have to take a car to actually go to the grocery store. I don't have to take a car to go to the library. I don't have to take a car to go to entertainment outlets and so on, but that you have it within a 15-minute radius so that you actually can walk or bike for that matter, or other non-motorized kinds of ways of getting there. And I think that concept, again, we will see how it flies, but at least it's something that is worth pursuing, perhaps also within the context of this challenge and how it actually contributes to air quality as well.
And I think that is a very good idea. How the results of this challenge can go far, and also think about solutions that in reality imply structural changes to the cities. So what in fact is the combination of shall I say factors that will lead to a better environment, so that we can almost prescribe city interventions. But I think this is not no longer just an operational problem. So it's, of course, we know that if we can reduce traffic jams, if we can divert traffic from one street that has too many cars to another street that doesn't have cars, we will improve the air quality. But I think we should have the ambition to think bigger and to try to identify what are the really key factors where we should take action to change completely the rules of the game.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, Miguel. And also, it also goes back to another element of the challenge, and perhaps, Miguel, that was what you wanted to go to as well, which is the visual. Actually, the both challenges, which I thought was kind of interesting. One is that how do we use advertising in a more compelling and aesthetically inducing way. But then also, how do we link that perhaps with even exercising? And so one initiative that was quite successful here also in New York was trying to think about, from a public health point of view, people were not exercising enough in New York City. I mean, as you know, the US has massive challenges with regard to obesity, diabetes, and so on. And surprise, surprise, they're all behavioral related. And so one idea that they had is that how do we get people to walk more, take the steps more, and so on. And it's basically a structural way, is that if you don't have access to an elevator, but you have steps, then that's going to automatically increase exercising, right? So we don't all have to have a fitness subscription. You can actually increase exercising by just the layout of your city, right? That makes people healthier. But you could also use advertising to actually, from a behavioral economics point of view, nudge people to not take the elevator, but the steps, and even use advertising to there are some places where if you go on the steps it makes sounds, for instance, and it could be connected with advertising for that matter, and people love it, right? And they will go for the steps as opposed to the elevator, right? And so there are smart ways to think about how do we use cues, visual cues, perhaps for advertising purpose. And I'm not advocating that we should get rid of all the advertising, because that, by the way, could be a good revenue stream to green cities. But to also perhaps think about also other public health kind of objectives, to actually have people walk more, do more challenging things than just get in the car and go to a place. And so those are, I think, the interesting areas from my point of view, where you actually more, as Miguel said, have a vision, or it's almost like a systems thinking vision that says how can we intervene, and then not only change the way a city operates, but also make it much more healthier for people living in the city. And I think the tools that you have laid out in the challenge are tools that could be combined, frankly, in an interesting way moving forward.
Miguel, your take on the topic that Stefan has just started, the visual pollution, let's say.
No, I think that's really interesting. I know when Stefan said a word that I like very much, but I don't know what are the consequences of nudging. But nevertheless, it's quite interesting because in fact, very small things trigger different behaviors, and which is really interesting. But it's also a question: how can, it's like with data, right? The ethicals of using this kind of approaches to impact behavior of people. But in fact, I think this is a great idea to look on these small things that if we change them in the cities, and if people start to use them every day, in the end, we will have significant impact in the overall. And I think that probably is one of the most important things today, because people tend to expect some kind of miracle measure that is going to solve the problem. So technology is overwhelming, and so there will be suddenly something that will solve this, like this air quality. No, nothing will. There will be no one measure that will solve this. So the question is, in fact, we have to take these small steps that all together they will take us in the right direction. And I think that ideas like this, trying to identify what could be the key points. I like one term, which is the acupuncture of cities. So trying to try to identify what are that little thing that we should do here and there, and to see how to get the results that we want.
Yeah, no, I agree with that as well. And on the visual pollution, obviously advertising is not the only aspect of visual pollution in a city, right? And so one question I have is, how can we actually blend those that are contributing to visual pollution by making it actually less polluted? For instance, one key element of visual pollution is actually trash, and the fact that you have trash cans on the street. All right, so why don't we use that for advertising and get rid of the billboards? And so you actually have something that is already a polluter, but then anyway, you instead of adding more, you use it to actually beautify perhaps a city in a particular way. The same thing for a variety of, anyway, here in New York City, it's amazing how many cables are still floating around. And so how can we, anyway, think in terms of using that, for instance, for greening? So if you would have on the cables, you would actually have green plants that are associated with it in order to make like green, anyway, arcades, for instance. That could all be done in a creative way.
I was thinking also something that is really useful, but I think it's too much nowadays. Like the information signs and traffic signs and security. It's visually it's too much. I know that probably we need them, but I think we tend to keep on putting more and more signs in the roads, and I think it's in the end it's too much confusion and not too much information, but nevertheless.
I know, I totally agree with that. And again, talking about nudging, for instance, and science, and how can we actually combine it? Like, anyway, so you have in many places, and I'm sure you have that as well, is that how do you increase, for instance, biking is by just showing how many bikes have passed by. And so those are the kinds of signals, right, that can say, meaning everyone is not biking, well, I should also start biking. And by the way, in New York City, the store with the longest lines these days are bike stores, right? So because we are, again, going through some kind of a revival on people not, well, the problem is that they don't take subway, which then also has itself kind of a challenge with regard to public transportation. But I think there are creative ways to indeed think about that. And even, like, for instance, it could be an interesting crowdsourced or citizen science initiative, is that how many signs are you exposed by just walking through your street? and does it actually add any value, right? And I think that in itself would be an interesting kind of project as well.
Yeah, now it's mine, not Stefan.
I think they hear each other and then they go.
I think both of your dogs want to go to a green space. They're kind of calling you. Come on, move fast. Miguel and Stefan, I want to ask you both, change the goalpost a little bit towards measuring impact, because that's also an objective of these challenges, is not only to develop the best model, but also to suggest solutions that are based in the findings from the data. So in your opinions, how can we measure the impact of a solution? In this case, you can choose any example that you've just mentioned, for example. How can I actually prevent what Stefan was saying of creating a bigger problem?
I can share an example that we have done, but I think there is it's already, I saw it already done in New York, was regarding the role of green infrastructures in storing carbon dioxide, and also the value that it has for society. So in fact, we can measure or as Stefan referred, the impact on health, and that how much that costs to society. So the whole. So I think that's,
yeah, no, I think exactly. And look, being as everything in measuring is that you do need to, how can we measure is by first determining what's your baseline, right? And that's where, anyway, exactly, I think it was mentioned by you, Miguel, or as well, is that, anyway, before you go, let's spend some time on understanding the problem and trying to identify what are some of the variables that matter that you do want to measure, whether there was a difference, right? And so I think that's task number one is, anyway, what's your model and what are the variables that you feel explain a certain kind of impact, and metrics, of course. And so that in itself would already be an interesting exercise. But quite often, anyway, some of those measures might be quantitative, but some of it will be qualitative, meaning quality of life is a qualitative, meaning it's called quality of life, is a qualitative experience. And so you could also think in terms of how do we complement it with, for instance, surveys that actually really get a sense on satisfaction of people living in neighborhoods, right? And how and satisfaction with regard to community bonding. So those are some of the elements you can think about, or you could also think about, anyway, as Miguel was saying, biodiversity is a massive challenge, and you could look into, anyway, can we use citizen science to monitor the return of wildlife, for instance, right? Every year here, there's a massive, across the US, exercise to count birds, which, as you know, goes down, which is a, anyway, there's a famous book about when the birds were silent, which was all about air pollution, right? And so I think those are the elements that you can also start thinking about. But anyway, it was interesting talking about dogs, that one of the challenges is how do you measure demand for green spaces? And I think it might be interesting to also think in terms of what's the correlation between having pets and the demand for green spaces, right? Right? And how does that actually influence, if you have a dog, anyway, how does it influence actually the demand for green spaces, not just for your own health, but also just for the fact that you do need to go walk. Now, the other side effect in this, of course, is that, which is interesting here, I live close to, I'm in Brooklyn, close to Prospect Park. There is also a concern with regard, if there are too many dogs, then it actually destroys biodiversity as well, right? And so there are all those kinds of, as Miguel was saying, interrelated aspects that you need to understand on how do you balance all of that in a way that benefits the city and its residents, right?
I was making a connection with what Stefan just said about the quality of life and the importance of social interaction in the cities. Also regarding considering the concept of the 15-minute city, because it's not just a question of getting access to the city services, as Stefan referred, in 15 minutes, but also that this will lead to a community, okay? So we will increase social interaction. And not long ago, I saw an experiment, I think it was in the United States, trying to understand why people live so long. And in the top, it was not physical activity or diet, or the people who lived long were the people who had more social interactions. And that's it.
Okay. I want to ask another question that we got from the audience, which is about implementing these solutions. And for example, we can pick up the topic of air quality as an example. What's, in your opinion, the difficulties in implementing solutions for air quality reduction? Why does it become difficult, assuming we have a good solution?
I will leave this one to Stefan, because I think that this is very related with the work I believe they are doing concerning data-driven public policy making. So I think that's all about it.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Miguel, for that. And well, again, implementation is, as I always say, you can have great ideas, great solutions on paper, and then you do need to execute, right? And I think that's where some of the typical challenges come into play. So there's nothing specifically unique, perhaps, to the air quality, although air quality is a really hard problem to address because it is systematic, and also because it's not straightforward, as I said, one pollutant, right? So it's a package that you really need to start trying to lower. But again, there are a few ways. One is use data to experiment. And exactly, I think your previous question is that how do we measure impact? I think that's what should be part of the equation, right? So really, anyway, like for instance, what they did here in New York City was that they said, all right, so why don't we close Times Square for 2 weeks and see what happens, right? And so the argument was always that we can't close it, there's too much traffic, it's going to be traffic jams, going to get things worse, right? Because if you close close streets, people, there will be more traffic jams, so more pollution because there will be more standing cars and things. Turns out traffic improved, and people anyway started to enjoy Times Square, and there were anyway they put some, and they did it in a really cheap way, i.e. they just put a line there and said no more access, right? And they put some chairs and tables so that people could actually sit as well, and it radically transformed. And so that was meant to be an experiment, and then say, let's see what happens, and then anyway, and then make it either permanent or change to another solution. So experimentation, I think, is a key element for implementation, which, by the way, should be something that most policymakers should embrace, as opposed to anyway assume that you will have the perfect solution from day one. And that's where, surprise, surprise, data comes in, of course, because anyway, experimentation can only be evaluated through actually more agile data use as well. And then the second thing I would say is to make the residents your change agents, and not just impose, but actually have them be part of the solution. Like, for instance, a big challenge also is that in some cities they've tried to experiment that with the residents and say, you own the parking lot. And that was transformative, because then they started to think creatively how they actually could manage their own spaces in a more creative way. Of course, anyway, I'm not advocating for revolution and everyone coming up with their own ideas, but you could co-design some of those kinds of things. And I think those, anyway, just two examples on how do you actually experiment more, and B, how do you also make residents part of the solution in co-designing approaches. I think those might deliver more than any kind of top-down kind of solutions as well. But I do also want to touch base with what Miguel said at the beginning, is that a key challenge is, of course, capacity within City Hall. And I think that's where it's then really, if you have limited capacity, it's really important to then make sure that you are answering the right question for all the efforts. Because many of those data initiatives are, anyway, just great, but meaning they give us insight that actually doesn't really matter. And so that's where you do need to spend a lot more time on problem definition, working with residents on really understanding what is it that could make a difference if we get this right. And so so I would argue is that in city halls, we've been advocating for actually more question science than data science, right? They should be the ones that really understand what's the question, right? And then you can find the bright geniuses that are part of this effort to help answer the question. But quite often they don't even know what the question is, right? And that's the problem.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's actually the problem that we found before we created World Data League, is that we could find people that knew how to solve problems. We just knew how to find the best problems and the best data. Miguel, your take on this? I don't know if we have 3 minutes left.
As I expected, we have a very good answer from Stefan regarding this topic, and I think that's the problem. What I see happening is that we jump to data and to the expectation that data science will solve the problem without spending the necessary time in understanding the problem and what is the real question. And this is still happening over and over again. So we should have another approach to these questions, because this idea that we are going to collect all the data, well, we need more data, and then in the end there is no added value from the exercise, because we were unable to clearly identify the problem. And suddenly we find out that the data that in fact was necessary for that specific question is not among the data that we have. So
yeah.
I think that,
and there's always the challenge of communicating technical things to non-technical decision makers. That kind of gets in the way sometimes of the implementation.
Yeah. And so we have an initiative called the 100 Questions, which is trying to, anyway, turn it a little bit upside down and say, what are the 100 questions that matter? And so we advocate that every city should actually have their 100 questions before they even think about, anyway, a data kind of strategy. Because then you can figure out, anyway, how you get the data eventually, right? Or whether you need more collection mechanisms. But key here is what we call bilinguals, which are domain experts that also have a data sensitivity, because you do need to have this bilingual kind of engagement in order to really understand what the problems are as well.
Okay, we're 1 minute left. So I think I will call back Leon here to the stage with us. We still have a couple of seconds. I don't know if any of you want to leave any last minute tips for
I want to leave an
participants.
invitation, Stefan. Please, now that you in the United States you are vaccinated and then can move freely, please visit us.
I'm on my way, Miguel. I'm on my way. I would be delighted.
Okay, we have Leon here with us. Leon, what do you thought of the roundtable?
I think it's really great insights from everyone, and I think I just would like to thank Stefan and Miguel for joining us and giving the opportunity for the participants to understand a bit the context as well. And I think we're basically kicking off the challenges in like right about now.
Right now.
Right now. All right, guys. Good luck. Enjoy working in this last challenges, and don't forget that every single one counts, because only the top 3 out of the 4 challenges will count towards the leaderboard. Good luck.
Yeah. And pay attention to the recordings, because Stefan and Miguel shared a lot of tips and tricks. So that's good to know. Stefan and Miguel, thank you so much.
Thank you
care.
very much.
Bye-bye. Pleasure seeing you all. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.